Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional, human rights and legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumila Mateza. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by calling us on our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts about this program and many other programs you want us to tackle at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. On March 1st, 2015, this article by Peter Williams appeared in the Rebus with the title, "Hate is a Crime." It read, "The District Court of Cape Town, sitting as the Equality Court, recently made a landmark ruling in Nomasomi Gloria Gente versus Andre van der Venter on October 24, 2014. Magistrate Jerome Coury is found in favor of the domestic worker in a case of hate speech and harassment. Mrs. Gente, a domestic worker, complained that after her shift had ended, she requested her employer's boyfriend to look after his own child for a brief period while she took a shower. Van der Venter got angry about this and grabbed her by the pajamas, spat in her face and told her she was a pathetic kafir, that she hated her. It transpired that this was not the first time that she was abused in this manner by somebody who is not even her employer. The trial was in accordance with the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act No. 4 of 2000. The Equality Act, in other words. In October 2016, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. Michael Masuta, announced a long-awaited draft Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill. Today on Rights and Recourse, we take a hard look at the efficacy of this bill. Can it withstand constitutional muster? Is it not a duplication of the Perpuda Act, which is the Equality Act? But first, let's take a look at this insert.
Today, we have published for public comment in the Government Gazette the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, which was approved by Cabinet on 19 October 2016. The bill creates offences of hate crimes and hate speech and seeks to put in place measures to prevent and combat these offences. A hate crime is committed if a person commits any recognized offence that is common law or statutory offence referred to as the base crime or offence. The very fact of referring matters of this nature directly to the regional court instead of the district court elevates or points to the seriousness of the offence, because actually it's behavior that's inimical to the very foundation of our constitution that seeks to uproot legacy of racism that we come with from our past. So it is a way of sending a strong signal out there in society that South Africa has reached a point where it will not tolerate racists and other such persons with unacceptable behavior of that kind.
Well, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. Michael Masuta, there. To discuss today's topic, we're joined in the studio by Ms. Thusi Fukane, Executive Director of the Freedom of Expression Institute. And at our Cape Town studio, we have the Deputy Minister of Justice, Mr. John Jeffrey. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Deputy Minister, let me fall in immediately with that question that I asked there. The case I referred to, the case law I referred to, was done under the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act No. 4 of 2000, the Equality Act, in other words. And it seems to be doing exactly what this bill seeks to do. Am I wrong?
It's doing something similar. The difference between Perpuda and this bill is that Perpuda is a civil remedy. So it's basically up to the aggrieved individual to take the matter to an equality court, whereas what this bill seeks to do is to make it a crime, which means it's then the responsibility of the state to prosecute.
the problem I have with a bill that seeks to make hate speech a crime, or it seems to walking all over freedom of expression.
Freedom of expression is not unlimited, as all the rights in the Constitution have to be balanced against each other. So already with Papuda and those provisions, you're limiting freedom of expression. I think the bottom line is it's not acceptable to use certain terms in South Africa, racial terms against other people. That would obviously be a limitation of freedom of speech. But I mean, it's also been defined, I think, by the courts or by some of the judges that hate speech is not free speech.
Well, Ms. Fokane, I hear what the minister is saying. My biggest problem, though, is the fact that the onus to, according to the minister, the onus to take a case up is on the individual who is aggrieved by hate speech or harassment or whatever. But I have a problem with a state that is trying to legislate what is hate speech, what is hate crime. Should that not be left to citizens like myself and you?
Thank you. I think that the challenge we have with the hate speech bill as it stands is that it seeks to criminalize forms of speech which are protected by the Constitution. So the limitations in terms of speech that is not protected is found in section 16.2. So that's typically speech that amounts to propaganda for war or an incitement of imminent violence or any kind of advocacy of hatred on the basis of a person's race, gender, religion, ethnicity, and that also constitutes an incitement to cause harm. So those are the limitations that we believe are in the Constitution, and that any other form of legislation or initiative should be aligned with what the constitutional limitations are. So we're concerned that the hate speech bill attempts to go much further than what is allowed for in the Constitution.
Deputy Minister, you heard that. I don't know whether you have a response to that, and I would have wanted to believe that when we draft legislation, we keep the Constitution close to our chest so that we do not deviate from what the Constitution wants us to achieve.
Sure. I mean, there's no point in passing laws that will be struck down by the Constitution. Yes, we do have to follow the Constitution, and ultimately it will be the Constitutional Court that will test the matter. But let me just explain, the bill's out for public comment. We would concede that it is broadly phrased and would need to be refined. However, we don't accept that the limitations in 16.2 that were referred to are the only limitations. There's a general limitation clause under section 36 of the Constitution. And calling somebody, using the K word, for example, as was in the case that you referred to, is not necessarily covered by 16.2. It doesn't necessarily constitute incitement to cause harm. It's just grossly insulting.
But it is covered by Papuda.
Constitutional Court case, SARS. Sorry?
It is covered by Papuda.
Well, Papuda also has to be consistent with the Constitution. But what I'm basically saying is not accepting that, or our view would be that using the K word against somebody would not be covered by the Constitution. And there is a recent Constitutional Court case from last year, that's SARS versus the CCMA, where in a judgment written by the Chief Justice, he said that use of the K word was hate speech. That doesn't fall into the limitations of 16.2, which effectively require incitement to cause harm. Using the K word is effectively just being grossly insulting.
Tusi, earlier I made reference to the minister, and I made the example of the Nomasomi Gloria Kentes versus Van de Venter case. In my view, that case law is actually doing exactly what this bill purports to want to do.
That's correct. I mean, Papuda makes provision for the establishment of equality courts. So there are designated magistrate courts that are specialized equality courts. And the reason for having had equality courts was to allow people a quicker and easier remedy to justice. And the equality court model is one that operates on the principle of restorative justice rather than taking a purely punitive angle. And the intention behind that was to allow ordinary South Africans, with the assistance of the clerk of the court, to be able to lodge any complaints that where they feel that their rights to dignity and equality have been violated. So the equality courts stand as a good model for recourse for anybody who feels that their rights to dignity and equality have been violated.
Minister, well, one of the things I'm reminded by something that I thought I was going to ask you way down the line, and that has to do with, I thought, should we leave these kind of things to be dealt with by citizens rather than have this big brother standing and say, I'm going to look after you? And this is what this bill is in my view, is saying. I'm going to look after you. I'm going to tell you what is wrong for you. I'm going to tell you what is right for you. What many people call, are we not becoming a nanny state?
Let me make a couple of points. With the hate crimes bill, we originally didn't have provisions relating to hate speech in it. But after the sort of slew of sort of quite reactionary racist comments on social media, we decided to put in a provision relating to hate speech. And that was in response to people saying this kind of conduct is not acceptable. The government, the state needs to do something about it. Now, as I'd said earlier, the main difference between this bill and Papuda is that Papuda is civil. The state is not doing anything. It's up to the aggrieved person to bring a case. And it's a bit like, I guess, with let's take assault. You can beat me up. I can then sue you for damages in a magistrate's and a civil court, or the state can also at the same time charge you. Now, is extreme abuse not a form of assault? And then also to add that hate speech is something that is, there is hate speech legislation in many countries around the world. Very often countries have tapered it to fit their historical conditions. So in Germany, for example, you're not allowed, as far as I'm aware, to deny the existence of the Holocaust. Obviously, that's a violation of freedom of expression, but the Germans obviously felt that in light of what happened, it was important to have that restriction. In Rwanda, there's limitations because of the genocide, limitations on issues relating to genocide. In Kenya, there's also, as a result of ethnic violence during recent elections, there's also restrictions on that. So this is not something that is uncommon, that countries actually do enact laws to respond to their situations. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves in South Africa is, should we be having a law to criminalize extremely racist comments?
Well, we will definitely do that. We will ask that question, should we be having a law that looks after me and you, whether we are being abused or not? Can't we identify that ourselves? If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498. Alternatively, you can tweet us at Right to Recourse or send us an email on righttorecourse.co.za. We'll be back right after this.
Failure to implement the water restriction is going to make the system not workable. For the domestic use, everyone should not exceed 25 kiloliters per day.
What is the penalty and how much have you raked in thus far as a municipality?
For domestic users, if the exceed 25 kiloliters, then they're going to be charged a penalty on their monthly bill. And so far already we've collected 1.7 million.
The 200 million rand state-of-the-art school in Magaliesburg has been vandalized by drug addicts. How bad is it?
It's very bad. Into the hostel residents, it was even worse because there the doors, the wardrobes, the beds, the ceiling were broken down. Showers were ripped off, and it couldn't be used by students who are actually using that particular boarding facility.
Welcome back to Rise and Recourse as we look at the hate speech bill or the hate crimes bill. I don't know which one to choose. Probably let's ask the minister. Minister, what do we? I haven't had a good chance of going through that because I was actually taken up by the Papuda Act. And what is hate speech and what is hate crime? What's the difference between the two?
Okay, hate crimes are existing crimes that are committed, or part of the motive for committing the crime is a dislike of the group that the person belongs to. So if you throw a brick at a mosque or a church, that's malicious injury to property. If it can be proved that you threw the brick at the mosque because you don't like Muslims, or you threw the brick at the church because you don't like Christians, then that can become a hate crime. And it would be dealt with more seriously in terms of more serious sentences and basically elevating it.
Shouldn't we be staying, in my view, with the Papuda Act rather than bringing another? Because if you look at the example I gave at the beginning of the show, it actually does the very same thing.
I would agree with that view, even though we do find certain sections of Papuda problematic in that we find it to be overly broad and not in line with the constitutional limitations to freedom of expression. But Papuda attempts to address the issues that are mentioned in the hate crimes, hate speech bill. And why Papuda would be a slightly better remedy is that it also makes provision for an exclusion clause. So the current hate speech bill does not make any provision for parody. It seeks to criminalize speech that could be found to be insulting, whereas Papuda makes provision for any bona fide publication that may be in the public interest, maybe for academic or scientific purposes, and it also makes allowance for parody. The current hate speech bill doesn't.
Let me go back to this very issue that Trusi is raising here, Deputy Minister, that the bill effectively bars cartoons and comedy and parody, as she says, and people poking fun at the president, cabinet ministers, members of parliament, and even officials like director generals. Should we not be worried?
Look, two issues. I mean, that is constitutionally protected. The right to artistic creativity, I think it is specified in the Constitution. But it is something that I think should be included in the bill because there has been so much concern raised about it. The intention is not to stop comedians or cartoonists from satirizing people, from allowing artists to express themselves. So very much that should be put in. Similarly, there have been concerns from religious groups that it will restrict their ability to preach religious texts, and there is religious freedom. We obviously can't censor the Bible or the Quran. So those obviously need to be put in. And the bill does need to be tightened so that it's clear that it is the more extreme forms of abuse, verbal abuse, that are what is being targeted. That is why a bill is put out for public. This is not the bill that's been introduced into Parliament. This is out for public comment. having heard all that comment and received that comment, we will be reworking it.
Well, let's take this call from Douglas from the Vaal. Douglas, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Hello?
Hello,
Can you hear
Douglas.
me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Douglas, we can hear you. Ask your question.
That's good. My name's Douglas. I'd like to say something, you know. This minister that you have got on your program, this Jeffrey's character, he's as wicked as what the day is long. He's a devil in disguise, that guy. Because if they had to just obey the Bible, they won't have to be writing all these laws. They just have to obey the Bible and God's word. And they'll go a lot further than writing all these nonsense laws that this minister, this deputy justice minister, he's wicked, man.
Now, come on, Douglas. Okay, thank you, Douglas. Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, Douglas will probably be the first person to be found guilty on the basis of this bill. Yes, Minister? Do you want to comment on what Douglas said? He's the first to be found guilty under this bill.
No, well, that's his position. I mean, obviously, there's a lot one can say in response to him. It would have been interesting engaging with him, but what he said is his view.
The other thing, Minister, many people have criticized the fact that this bill is reliant very much on criminalization and incarceration as a deterrent to crime and violence. Is strongly criticized by many community organizations.
Sorry,
I don't know whether you heard me. I said the bill is reliant on criminalization.
No, can you repeat? Sorry.
And incarceration.
Yes. Well, it's criminalization. Incarceration is something coming.
That will depend on the judge or the magistrate.
As far as I remember. Well, yeah, and as far as I remember, the proposal in the bill on hate speech was that if you got found guilty more than once or the second time, it should be a heavier penalty. With hate crimes, because it's making those crimes more serious, that would result probably in imprisonment. But yes, it's criminalizing. But if I can go back to the question and what this bill is in, or the hate speech sections of the bill is in response to, is should it be criminalized in South Africa to use extreme racist language? We had the first incident was, we seem to every year over the Christmas season have issues relating to beaches. That was the first Penny Sparrow incident. Yes, there was an outcry. Yes, she was taken to the Equality Court. I think she also pleaded guilty to criminal injuria, which is something I'd like to get onto in more detail. But then this past Christmas, we had somebody else coming up with similar comments. And those cause a fair amount of outrage from people. What should we as government, as the state, be doing about it? Should we be saying, no, we've given you the Equality Court, go there and take up the matter there? Or should we be looking at more serious remedies for it?
Now you put you put your finger on it, Deputy Minister. I think citizens, tell me if I'm wrong, citizens should be allowed to understand the meaning of the Constitution and what the Constitution allows them to do and take up these issues themselves rather than being pushed by government to do that.
I think the challenge we're obviously dealing with in South Africa is a social one. It's a structural one that's related to the history of the country. The Human Rights Commission held hearings on racism and social media in South Africa last week. And a lot of these issues came up, and I think one of the questions that we're still grappling with is how do you legislate for good human behavior or good South African kind of conduct or good citizenship? And I'm not sure if legislation is necessarily the best route for us to deal with our social problems, right? The particular challenge that the hate crimes, hate speech bill presents is we've moved from freedom of expression being protected in the Constitution in terms of Section 16, with the internal limitations in terms of 16.2. We've then moved to PAPUDA, which includes elements of harm, etc., to hate speech, which, as the Minister mentioned, seeks to criminalize extreme racist language. Now, one would want to know, is there a list of certain prohibited words or terms so that every South African, when they open their mouth to tweet or express themselves on social media, are aware that this is the list of banned words that you can no longer use in South Africa? The challenge is when you're trying to apply, I think, a legal kind of remedy to what is essentially a social problem, and I think there isn't sufficient guideline coming from the state in terms of how far South Africans can go in expressing themselves.
Let's take this call from Nathan from the Free State. Nathan, good afternoon and welcome to Rise and Recourse.
Afternoon, Dumila. How are you?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine. I would like to make a contribution, and it's very short. What I'd like to say is that this bill is most welcome, and I agree entirely with the Minister because it brings a criminal element into the mix. Most of the time, people are convicted of saying derogatory stuff to black people usually pay a fine, which wasn't that much painful to them because they got a lot of money. But in this instance, now they can be convicted of crimes, they can even go to jail, and also they have the stigma of having a criminal record to your name, which might have repercussions when they are applying for employment or at university. So I support this bill entirely. I think the government is doing something which is good because these racists are actually bringing us backward. As a country, we want to move forward, but they are bringing us backward. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nathan. Minister, you probably want to respond to what Tusi was saying earlier and also to what Nathan is saying.
Yes, if I may. Well, obviously, look, I mean, in terms of what Nathan has said, yes, he's put his finger on the motivation for the bill. In terms of the issue raised of this, let me just also stress this bill is not being seen as the answer to racism. We will never address and solve the problems of racism in South Africa until we address the whole issues of structural inequality that came about because of the history of South Africa. So it's not an attempt to do that. It's simply to say if you are abusive, extremely abusive, there should be criminal sanction. There can't be a list of words because the context is important. And that is a definition in the bill at the moment, and it will be for the courts to interpret. So I think that it's going to be for the other issue with the bill is that prosecution will only be done by a very senior prosecutor, the provincial head of prosecutions effectively, so it won't be, the responsibility won't be left up to junior prosecutors. But one would very much have to look at the context. So for example, if you take the use of the word nigger, now young black men will call each other nigger. But I as a non-African man or non-black man, I can't use that word. So it's the context that it gets used in that becomes important. If I call somebody that word, then there may be penalties that should be attached to me for using that.
That again, Minister, there is a very real issue here with regard to parody, as Tusi was pointing to earlier. This word, nigger, where blacks call each other nigger, and somebody calls my China man. In other words, you can't have my China anymore. Taking out the fun from the way we live, from the way we do things.
Can I come in there?
No,
I mean,
go
as I said,
ahead.
the Constitution specifies. Yeah, thanks. The Constitution specifies that freedom of expression includes freedom of artistic creativity. We would see that as including protecting comedians. We take the point that there should have then been more explicit reference to that in the bill, and we would then be following, I think, similar provisions to what is in Papuda of specifying that people who, the satirists, cartoonists, etc., should not be restricted. Obviously, it can't be an absolute exemption because you can still use satire, or a comedian can still call for a genocide, and that can't be allowed. But it generally should exempt cartoonists, comedians, etc.
Well, that's something we should we take that lying down, that it will exempt comedians. Comedians will be able to poke fun at presidents and ministers and director generals still, and cartoonists.
We hope other South Africans as well.
Well, surely reading this bill, I got an impression, somebody told me when I said I'm going to have this discussion, somebody said to me, you might find this bill might prohibit terms like white monopoly capital and a radical economic transformation and national democratic revolution. Minister? Do you want to take it?
Well, I mean, hence I was asking the question earlier, will there be a list of prescribed words that ordinary South Africans are aware that they ought not to use because they're likely to face the threat of criminal sanctions under the hate speech bill? The challenge is the bill, I think, attempts to achieve a noble purpose, promotion of equality, promotion of dignity, but it shouldn't do so at the expense of freedom of expression.
Minister, let's go back to an issue raised earlier. You said you wanted to...
Yeah, the sound is not good.
The sound is not good. You're struggling. Okay, we want to correct that sound to you, Minister, because I've got a few questions that I want you to answer here. We'll go to a break. When we come back, we'll come straight back to you. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 01171 45497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rise Recourse. Stay with us.
Now this is Trends, of course, your one-stop serving of all that's juicy and trending in the world of entertainment and showbiz. My name, of course, is Refiel Wemulov.
I'm Dr. Sello Mutaung, and this is our talk.
A very good morning and welcome to Media Monitor. I'm your host, Alicia Jolly.
My name is Dumile Matters.
William Mulebati.
My name is Mpho Sedu. What time is it? It's question time.
For your daily dose of current affairs, tune in to the SABC News Channel.
Technology is all around us and some can't live without it.
There's also the problem of internet connectivity.
I was speaking to a robot.
It also makes a few governments panic and therefore they block the internet from time to time.
They just ban the internet, which is the source of my livelihood.
For African technology and social media news, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we take a look at the hate speech bill that is currently under discussion across the country. Everybody is going with a fine comb through this bill, and many people have made their inputs. They're still going to make their inputs in Parliament before the Portfolio Committee for Justice. Minister, Deputy Minister, looking at Section 21(2)(n) of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination, the Papuda Act, it actually does say an order directing the clerk of the Equality Court to submit the matter to the Director of Public Prosecution having jurisdiction for the possible institution of criminal proceedings in terms of the common law or relevant legislation. Again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that this bill seems to be a duplication of the Papuda bill.
No, because yes, the Papuda has that section saying that the matter can be referred to the NPA. But in terms of the criminal law, what we've got at the moment is a common law crime of crimen injuria. That's a old Roman Dutch common law crime. It's a little bit unclear in certain sections to what extent, and well, the question, sorry, before that, the question is actually, is that common law Roman Dutch crime the best response to deal with verbal abuse in South Africa and in particular racism? There's some doubt as to whether for crimen injuria to apply, whether you've got to insult a specific person, and that if you insult a group of people, whether crimen injuria would apply. So what I think the other way of looking at the hate speech provisions is that it's an attempt to bring those common law provisions more in line with the situation in South Africa in the 21st century.
The more I think about it, the more I think... let me go to Victor in Durban. Victor, good afternoon and welcome to Rise and Recourse.
Good afternoon. Thank you. As a new South African in the new South Africa, a white person, I really try to do things right, align myself and comply with what's happening in South Africa. I have a black partner. We try to do things right. I am really concerned about utterances by Mr. Julius Malema, the things that he say in the media. You know, I feel unsafe in my own country. Sorry, I am born here. I don't even own a house, but I do own a business. We're working towards creating something, but I am scared about utterances from Mr. Julius Malema. It's well done in the media. I don't need to tell you what he says. Just tell us about these kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. I think Vic makes. I think the comments he's talking about are comments like, for instance, the ones I referred to earlier, that people speak about gleefully: white monopoly capital, radical economic transformation, or national democratic revolution. Some people might get very scared.
So in the specific case, I think it was AfriForum that took Mr. Malema to the Equality Court, and there he was found guilty of hate speech for certain of the utterances that he had made.
That was after he made the kill the Boer, kill the farmer.
That's correct.
Speech.
That's correct.
Minister, with that case, Deputy Minister, that very case, in the Malema versus AfriForum, the ANC contended that liberation songs have a further function.
Yeah.
They are intended to psychologically bond the group of soldiers together or to encourage them as a unit to act against the enemy. But you can't do that in today's South Africa, can you? This bill will outlaw that.
Well, no, that's where the context becomes important. What is the context in which the words were used? So that's why with Tusi's suggestion of a list of words, that would never work because the context becomes important. So if you say kill the Boer, then on the face of it, that could be seen as incitement to violence. But if it's in the context of a struggle song, I mean, then that may give a different context to the matter.
Deputy Minister, I don't like to hog on this thing. When the committee that was looking at the South African anthem was putting together the South African anthem, putting the stem and Nkosi Sikelel together, they specifically said, I seem to remember, that they tried to walk away from ons sal lewe, ons sal sterwe, ons vir jou South Africa. Is that the kind of context we're talking about? Because Nobody says he's going to kill anybody. The only words are on side. We will leave. We will fight for you, South Africa. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think that let me just also stress that this bill is about extreme forms of verbal abuse. So I think things like some of the examples you've raised, Dumile, I really can't see those coming anywhere close. It would be what the bill is trying to address is particularly racial abuse against people, but of a very serious nature, or threats against people, threats against nationalities, for example. We have problems of genocide of xenophobia in South Africa. Those are the issues that the bill
morning in
is
Pretoria.
trying to address.
Well, I was saying there's been some xenophobic violence in Pretoria today, this morning, reported this morning.
Yeah. So those are the kinds of things, not general debate, not general insults. And it's like, for example, the first caller who said I was wicked. I'm not sure why. I mean, you know, we've all got to have I'm not quite sure why he felt that, but that's his view. That's not something that I'm going to want to rush to him well, it's not even clear that that's an equality matter. But you know, we must accept that sometimes debate gets robust, but it's the extreme ones that are the problem. And where there's extreme use of racist terminology, for example, what does that do to the national mood? What does that do to social cohesion in South Africa? It's interesting that you know, some of the media houses had stopped online comments on the articles because they were too abusive. Obviously, that was a curtailment of freedom of expression, but I think that they felt that it just wasn't worth it in terms of the abuse that certain people were giving under the guise of anonymity.
Let's take this call from Victor before I come to you, Ms. Fukane. Victor, good afternoon, and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Victor.
Gentlemen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, sir. The Minister, I welcome and love you. There are remnants of those who thought this world belongs to them. That's why we're having AfriForum, their grouping is becoming a right wing of Gerinel happened to go into them. I want to send my position. It's either he joined them or not because of his brother, whatever, you know, the one with no legs. But what I want to talk about is one. I'm going to be very short and specific. I always get talking about victimization of you know, the last kicks of the dying horse. It lies who they think they've been there, they'll be there forever.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you very much, Victor. We've picked you up. You are saying you are, Deputy Shaw, you are not advocating that government should ban AfriForum. Do you want to take that up? It looks like he's making reference to AfriForum and the fact that Gerinel has joined them. Now, that's got absolutely nothing to do with what we are talking about. But let's talk about this AfriForum thing. Is there anything wrong for people to say they are going to fight for their rights because they are protecting the Constitution? Whether they are, other people see it as racist.
I think you raise an important question that our view has always been that the Constitution exists as a framework and guideline for South Africa. And it's one that was adopted by all South Africans. And we have a challenge when the executive is attempting to introduce certain limitations that don't exist in the Constitution, no matter how laudable their aims and attempts may claim to be. The minister keeps making reference to extreme racist language, extreme forms of verbal abuse. But the ordinary South African won't have any clarity or certainty what might constitute extreme racist language or extreme forms of verbal abuse. And the challenge particularly is when you leave the state open to intervene on what should be human-to-human interaction, it's a concern.
I think the Minister made mention of that. He talked about social cohesion, and I wanted to raise the question earlier. Shouldn't we rather leave this to person, social cohesion? Social cohesion cannot be driven by legislation, cannot be driven by a government. It should be between people, talking to people.
It's a concern, and I think we also need to bear in mind in South Africa, we come from a past where the government purported to introduce laws in the public interest or for our own good. So the current government's sort of terminology, social cohesion, the national mood, we're concerned that this current government obviously purports to do it for the social good. What if there's another government that you've now opened the door for them to introduce other forms of censorship and oppression between people in terms of the things that people are allowed to say and not allowed to say? So we need clarity in terms of what this bill seeks to do, what it is that we mean when we talk about extreme racist language, what it is that we mean when we talk about extreme forms of verbal abuse. Because the Constitution is clear here in terms of what the limitations to freedom of expression are.
Minister, I want to join Ms. Fukanide. Do we appreciate the fact that South Africa is a constitutional democracy and not a parliamentary democracy, and that we cannot churn out legislation every time we wish to do so?
Sure, but let me ask you both a question. If I were to use the K word, if I were to, or somebody was to call, if a white person was to call a black person that word, would that be in contravention of the Constitution? Can I ask you both that question?
Obviously, the Constitution doesn't make
particularly, can I ask
freedom of expression.
Tusi that to begin with, because she's the main advocate. Can I ask if does she see the use of that word in contravention of the Constitution?
It's open season. I'll open your view up.
And where it's used in the context of an insult. I mean, yes, it's in some early bits of literature, story of an African farm. But if somebody were to call her that, would she see that as being in contravention of the Constitution?
Okay, so I'm going to speak in terms of what the courts have decided. So the courts have decided that the use of the K word is offensive and insulting to black people. So we do appreciate and accept that. With myself in particular, it would depend.
Minister, I think I want to stress...
Surely you recognize... No, but you see, you're both saying that we're trying to bring something that's unconstitutional here. And what I'm saying is that the court specifically in the SARS matter said that the use of that word was hate speech. Okay, so how can the use of that word be constitutional? Or how can a ban on the use of that word where it is meant to be abusive, how can that be unconstitutional?
Minister, if you could give us a chance, I just want to take, we will answer that question. I'll get Ms. Fokwane to answer that question broadly, but I just want to take this call from Nick from Pretoria. Nick, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Hello, Mr. Matez, how are you?
Fine, thanks. How are you, Nick?
All right, man. It's Nick Pretoria. Okay, I see this Deputy Minister of Justice is there. What is happening? This hate speech is not going to go away. It's not that easy. What is happening is the hate speech is mainly caused by violence in the country. And that violence, we don't treat other groups. We treat them in a different way. Like if I'm black and I go and maybe hijack a white person, what will that white person say about it? Surely the other race groups, they provoke other people to do things that are not meant to.
Thank you, Nick.
I'm putting the blame entirely on the government.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. Nick says he puts the blame entirely on the government, but I wanted to bring in something else. We are not trying to say there is what we are trying to say, Minister, really is we find that there is enough in the Papuda Act to cover all of these bases that are in this new bill. That is our view. That is my view.
Yeah, well, I assume that's your view. That would be Tusi's view too. Obviously we will listen to that. But the question, as I raised earlier, is Papuda enough? And should we not be doing more to criminalize seriously abusive, particularly racist language? Yes, we've got the crime of criminal injuria, but as I said, that is an old Roman Dutch common law crime. Should we not be having a law more geared towards particularly racism in South Africa? And then let me also make a point which I hadn't raised earlier, that I mentioned a large number of other countries across the world having it. In terms of our international treaty obligations, we have been asked by the Human Rights Committee in Geneva when we did our report last year on civil and political rights, and by the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, specifically about what was being done about hate crime and hate speech legislation. So it's part of an international context. It needs to be seen in that context as well. But I hear your views. And I think it's something that as the whole country, everybody should be debating. Is Papuda, is criminal injuria enough?
Just answer that question. I want to go back to that question. To answer the question, Tusi, the other thing I wanted to do, the minister made reference to criminal injuria, which is a people-to-people, litigation. People-to-people litigation.
Offense.
And I think that is what should be left. It must be left to the courts to decide whether it is hate speech or not hate speech. Not for government to come and tell us this is hate speech.
I think I agree with you that we would be opposed to a blanket ban on certain forms of speech or a blanket approach on certain forms of speech. And the question relating to the use of the K word being deemed hate speech is an interesting one, because the courts have found that the use of the K word is insulting, it is derogatory, it demeans a person's right to equality and dignity, and where it's related to, say, an employment context, it can be prejudicial, it can amount to unfair discrimination.
And in fact, we pointed it out in our case law that we quoted earlier.
Right. So what is useful about Papuda is that it makes provision for anybody who feels aggrieved to have recourse to go to the courts. And there the courts will look at each matter on a case-by-case basis and decide and determine the merits of the matter. Unlike a current situation now, where what the government is effectively proposing is censorship on certain forms of expression, certain forms of speech, without giving the South African public any clarity or certainty as to what kind of speech will and will not be allowed. That's the primary challenge.
Should we not be doing that, Minister? Because it doesn't matter whether you have the hate speech bill or the Papuda Act. Still, the burden of proof is on the respondent that must prove with the facts before a court.
Look, let me just clear up with Tusi's point. Obviously, we, as I said, need to tighten up a lot of the provisions of the hate crime section of the hate speech section of the hate crimes bill. But it's ultimately going to be the courts that are going to interpret it. It's not going to be government that is going to be saying you've committed a crime or you haven't. You've committed a crime or you haven't. So it's going to be the courts that are going to be interpreting it. Yes, the courts do develop common law to some extent, but it is also the job of Parliament to pass laws and to make laws responding to society. So, for example, let's take rape. Rape used to be a common law. Its elements were determined effectively by the courts. When we passed the Sexual Offences Act a few years ago, we made it a statutory crime. We extended the definition of rape and to respond to the situation, the needs on the ground in South Africa. Should we not be doing that with hate speech legislation rather than leaving it up to the courts to determine whether crimen injuria can now be extended to include a general body of people rather than a specific individual. But let me stress that it will be ultimately the courts who decide whether a person is guilty of a hate crime or hate speech. So it's not going to be a government minister or the president saying, Dumile, you're guilty. It's going to be the courts.
But it should not be legislated.
It should not be legislated beyond the limitations provided for in the Constitution.
Well, Minister, thank you very much for your time, and Ms. Tusi, thank you, Ms. Fokane, thank you very much for your time. South Africa's Constitution is the proudest achievement of our young democracy. As our country reaches the inflection point in the development of our democracy, many South Africans forget that there are millions of people around the world who are still fighting for the rights enshrined in our democracy. Rights we take for granted. One is reminded of the words of Pastor Martin Niemöller, who said, first, I quote, they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists. I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unions. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Therefore, let's read our Constitution, close quote. The views expressed on the show are not necessarily those of the SABC or Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 5 on Wednesday morning. You can also find us on YouTube, and you can also continue to tweet. From all of us and the crew, thank you to our guests, and goodbye.